They thought I was just a porcelain doll living in the Vance family display case, a trophy wife who only knew how to sign checks and smile at charity galas. But as I stepped into our Seattle penthouse with a thick dossier instead of souvenirs, the triumphant grins on my husband and his boss vanished. I was about to teach them the most expensive lesson in high society: never underestimate the woman who holds the keys to the vault. My name is Serafina Vance, and until tonight, the two men sitting in my living room thought I was nothing more than a decorative accessory. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, blurring the lights of the Seattle skyline into streaks of weeping gray and gold. It was a cold, miserable evening outside, the kind of weather that made the bones ache, but inside, the climate was controlled to a precise 72 degrees. The air smelled of expensive leather, polished mahogany, and the 30-year-old single malt scotch that my husband, Julian, was currently pouring for his boss, Preston Sterling. I stood in the shadows of the foyer for a moment, unseen and unheard. The plush carpeting absorbed the sound of my arrival, allowing me to witness them in their natural habitat. They were celebrating. Their laughter was loud, jagged, and full of the arrogant confidence of men who believe they have already won the war. They were toasting to a hostile takeover, a merger designed to dismantle my father's company, Vance Global Logistics. They spoke of it as a done deal, completely unaware that the board meeting I had attended in Chicago was not the frivolous social gathering they had assumed it to be. To the end of the dinosaur era, Preston said, raising his crystal tumbler, Marcus Vance had a good run, but the world belongs to the hungry now. Once we secure those shipping routes, the stock will triple. Julian clinked his glass against Preston's, his face flushed with excitement and the alcohol he had likely been consuming since 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He never saw it coming. Preston, the old man, is losing his touch, and Serafina. She thinks she is helping by attending some charity gala disguised as a board meeting. It is almost too easy. She will sign whatever papers I put in front of her, just like she always does. I stepped into the light of the chandelier. Usually, I would have rushed to Julian, dropped my bags, and asked for a kiss, playing the role of the doting wife. Not tonight. I wore a sharp charcoal blazer instead of my usual pastels, and my hair was pulled back in a severe bun. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, a slow, deliberate cadence that cut through their laughter like a knife. The room fell silent. I stopped a few feet away from the sunken seating area and scanned the space. The abstract painting my mother had given us for our wedding was gone, removed from the mantel. In its place hung a gaudy, modern piece that screamed new money, something Julian must have purchased in the 3 days I was gone. He had moved the furniture too, shifting the focal point away from the view of the bay and toward the wet bar. It was a subtle territorial pissing match, a sign that he thought this house and my inheritance was finally his alone. Julian stood up, his smile tight and practiced. He set his glass down on the coaster, attempting to shift gears from conspirator to loving husband. Serafina, darling, you are back early, he said, walking toward me with open arms. I didn't hear the elevator. How was Chicago? Did you manage to stay awake during the whatever boring presentations you had to sit through? He stopped when he realized I was not moving to embrace him. His arms dropped to his sides, though the smile remained plastered on his face. Preston remained seated, swirling his drink. He looked at me with the amusement one might reserve for a performing poodle, eyes scanning me from head to toe. Business conferences can be so draining for the ladies, Preston drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. I hope you at least found time for the magnificent mile. Serafina, I hear the shopping is spectacular this time of year. Did you buy yourself something pretty? I did not smile back. I did not explain. Instead, I walked straight to the glass coffee table that separated us. I was carrying a heavy leather briefcase, not a designer purse. I lifted it and let it drop onto the glass surface. The heavy thud echoed through the large room, vibrating the expensive crystal coasters and causing the liquid in Preston's glass to ripple. Julian blinked, his facade slipping for a fraction of a second. He looked at the briefcase, then at me, confusion clouding his handsome features. "The trip was more interesting than you think, Julian," I said, my voice steady and devoid of any warmth. "I met an old friend of yours." The color drained from Julian's face. It was a subtle shift, but I knew every inch of that face. His eyes darted to Preston and then back to me. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry, nervous cough. He took a step back, his confidence wavering. "A friend I didn't know anyone was in Chicago," Julian stammered, his eyes fixated on the leather case. I did not answer him. I reached for the brass latches of the briefcase. Click, click. The sound was crisp and final in the tense silence. I slowly lifted the lid, revealing the neatly stacked papers that detailed every lie he had ever told me, preparing to shatter the glass house he had built on my foundation. As the leather folder fell open, revealing the first few incriminating documents, my mind drifted back to where this farce began. It was 4 years ago at a yacht show in Miami. The sun was blazing, the champagne was flowing, and Julian Thorne appeared like a mirage amidst the humidity and excess. He was the golden boy of Sterling Capital, an investment director with a smile that could disarm a nuclear warhead and ambition that burned brighter than the Florida sun. Unlike the other suitors who circled me like hungry sharks smelling my inheritance, Julian seemed refreshingly indifferent to the Vance family fortune. He charmed me with talk of art and philosophy, never once asking about stock prices or shipping lanes. My father, Marcus Vance, saw through him immediately. Dad was a titan of the shipping industry, a man who had built an empire by reading the currents of the ocean and the hearts of men. He hated Julian on sight. "He is too polished." Serafina. My father had warned me one evening on the terrace, swirling his cognac. "A man that perfect is hiding something rotten." Wolves often wear silk suits. I had dismissed it as overprotective cynicism. I was in love, or, at least, I was in love with the reflection of myself I saw in Julian's eyes. When Dad insisted on a prenuptial agreement, I fought him. But Marcus Vance did not become a billionaire by compromising. He drafted a contract that was less of a marriage license and more of a moral straitjacket. It contained clauses regarding fidelity, ethical conduct, and a complete separation of assets. If Julian violated the moral codes, he would get nothing, absolutely nothing. I remembered the day Julian signed it. He sat in my father's mahogany library, read the document that effectively cut him off from billions of dollars, and looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "I am marrying you." "Serafina, not your father's shipping containers," Julian had said, his voice thick with emotion. "I would sign it in blood if I have to. I just want to be your husband." I melted. I was a fool. We had a wedding that cost $3 million on a private island in the Caribbean. But looking back now, through the lens of betrayal, the memory shifted. I recalled the moment I walked down the aisle. Julian was not looking at me with adoration. He was scanning the crowd of VIP guests, his eyes darting from senators to CEOs, calculating the net worth of the room. He was not looking at his bride. He was looking at his new network. Back in the penthouse, the silence stretched thin. I watched Julian pour himself another drink. His hand trembled slightly, causing the amber liquid to splash against the rim. The mask was cracking. For the last 2 years, he had slowly chipped away at my confidence. He told me I was too emotional for business. He insisted he handle our personal finances because numbers stressed me out. He isolated me from the company, telling me to enjoy the lifestyle while the men did the heavy lifting. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Julian asked, his voice pitching higher than usual. "Serafina, you are acting strange." "Did something happen with your father?" He had no idea. The board meeting in Chicago was a setup. My father had claimed he was too ill to travel and asked me to go in his place. It was the perfect bait. Julian had been ecstatic when I told him I was leaving for 3 days. He practically packed my bags for me. "You should go, darling," he had said 3 days ago, kissing my forehead with a cold familiarity. "It is important for you to represent the family, and I will hold down the fort here." He thought he was sending a naive sheep into a boardroom of wolves, giving him and Preston the clear air they needed to finalize their hostile takeover. He thought I was just going to nod, smile, and come home with duty-free perfume. He never imagined that the sheep was actually the daughter of a lion, and she had finally decided to bite back. The shareholders' meeting in Chicago was a fabrication. "Julian," I said, sliding a glossy photograph across the table. It stopped right at the edge of his whiskey glass. There was no board convening at the Palmer House. But the executive suite at the Ritz, that was very much occupied. By Silas Graves. The name hit the room like a physical blow. Silas Graves was my father's personal attorney, a man known in legal circles as the Grim Reaper because when he showed up, someone's career usually died. Julian swallowed hard. "Silas, why would you see him? He had something to play for me," I replied, pulling a small USB drive from the case. It was a recording from a bar in the Lower East Side. "You were drunk, loud, and incredibly stupid." I didn't need to play it. I saw the memory flash behind his eyes. "You told your fraternity brothers that marrying me was the ultimate long con." I recounted, my voice flat. "You called it mining the Vance vein. You laughed about how easy it was to fool the old man and his naive daughter. That was just talk. Serafina locker room talk." Julian cried out, leaning forward. "I was drunk. I didn't mean any of it. Silas digs deeper than drunk talk." I cut him off. I pulled out a thick stack of spreadsheets, bound with a red clip. "We looked into your portfolio at Sterling Capital. You are not a genius investor. Julian, you are a laundry machine." Preston shifted in his chair, his leather shoe tapping nervously against the floor. "Careful, Mrs. Vance. Those are serious accusations. I have the transfer logs." "Preston," I shot back without looking at him. "Julian has been moving illicit funds through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, disguising them as high-yield tech investments. And worse, he has been using his proximity to me to access Vance Global's shipping manifests." I looked Julian dead in the eye. "You sold our route schedules to our competitors in China. That is why we lost the bid for the Shanghai contract last month. You sold my family out for a 3% commission." Julian's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked at Preston for help, but the older man was busy examining his fingernails, distancing himself from the sinking ship. "And the money," I continued, relentless. "It didn't go into savings. It went to Las Vegas, the Bellagio, the Venetian. You are down nearly $400,000 in poker debts. Julian, debts you covered by making strategic withdrawals from our joint maintenance account, labeling them as home repairs." I can win it back," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "I have a system, Serafina. I just had a run of bad luck. Please." "Is Project Obsidian part of that system?" I asked softly. The color vanished from Julian's face entirely. He looked as if he might vomit. Even Preston froze, his hand halfway to his glass. Project Obsidian was their secret masterpiece, a plan to leverage Julian's insider status to devalue Vance Global stock from the inside, allowing Sterling Capital to buy it for pennies on the dollar. "You know about Obsidian?" Preston asked, his voice losing its mocking edge. "That is confidential, proprietary information. You have no right to—" "I have every right," I snapped, slamming a single sheet of paper onto the pile. "Especially when my husband funds his buy-in by forging my signature." The paper lay between us. It was a loan application for $500,000 from a private lender, a loan shark, really secured against my personal jewelry collection and art assets. At the bottom, a clumsy imitation of my signature sat next to Julian's flourishes. I needed the liquidity, Julian stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It was just temporary. I was going to pay it back as soon as the merger went through. I swear. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. This man, who had slept beside me for 3 years, who had held my hand at family dinners, was not just a liar. He was a parasite. A criminal who had looked at me and seen nothing but a line of credit to be exhausted. You committed fraud, Julian, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed in the large room. You stole from me. You stole from my father. And you did it all while pretending to be the perfect husband. Julian's hands were shaking violently now. He reached for his glass, but his grip failed him, and the expensive crystal slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot. He stared at the shards, breathing hard, realizing that I knew everything. I knew more than he had ever feared possible. Serafina, wait, he gasped, looking up at me with terror in his eyes. We can fix this. Preston, tell her it is just business. But I was done listening. The porcelain doll was broken, and underneath, there was only steel. I tossed the second file onto the glass table. It landed with a lighter slap than the heavy financial records, but the weight of its contents was far more crushing. This was not about money. This was about human wreckage. You forgot to mention New York. Julian, I said, my voice dangerously soft. Specifically, a woman named Elena. Julian flinched as if I had struck him physically. He took a step back, nearly knocking over the side table. Elena, that was years ago. He stammered, his eyes darting around the room. We dated briefly. It didn't work out. She was complicated. You were married to her for 18 months, I corrected him, watching the blood drain from his face. Silas found the marriage certificate in the City Hall archives, and he found the divorce decree, the one that was finalized while she was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility upstate. Preston raised an eyebrow. His interest peaked for the first time since I walked in. Messy. Julian. Very messy. She was unstable, Julian cried out, sweat now streaming down his temples. She had episodes I tried to help her, but she was paranoid. She thought everyone was stealing from her because you were stealing from her. I said, she had a modest inheritance from her grandmother, not a fortune like the Vance estate, but enough to start a life. And you took every penny while convincing the doctors she was delusional. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, the fog of my own insecurity lifted. The last 2 years of my life flashed before my eyes, recontextualized, the constant headaches, the anxiety that kept me up at night, the way I constantly second-guessed my own decisions. It was not me. It had never been me. It was him. You did it to me too, I realized aloud, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The way you would tell me I looked tired before a big event so I would stay home. The way you laughed at my ideas at dinner parties, calling them quaint until I stopped speaking altogether. You made me believe I was lucky that a man like you would settle for a simpleton like me. You are being hysterical, Julian scoffed, falling back on his old reflex, trying to make me feel small. See, this is exactly what I mean. You get these ideas, and you spin out of control. I did not argue. I simply pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The room filled with the sound of a woman's voice. It was raspy, broken, and thick with tears. He told me I was crazy. Elena's voice played from the recording, echoing off the high ceilings. He moved my keys, hid my documents, and then asked me why I lost them. He made me think I was losing my mind so he could get power of attorney. Please, Ms. Vance, don't let him do it to you. He is a monster. Julian lunged for the phone, desperation contorting his features. Turn it off. She is a liar. She is a sick, bitter woman who just wants to ruin me. I stepped back and silenced the recording. I looked at Preston. He was not looking at Julian with sympathy. He was looking at him with pure disdain, not because Julian was a predator, but because he was a sloppy one. You left a trail, Julian, Preston muttered, shaking his head and taking a sip of his scotch. Rule number 1, never leave a trail. I am not Elena, I said, my voice steady as steel. I am not alone in a city with no family, and my father is not a senile old man you can charm or manipulate. You thought you were breaking a horse, Julian, but you were just poking a sleeping dragon. The air in the room shifted. The heavy tension of a domestic dispute evaporated, replaced by the cold, sterile atmosphere of a boardroom execution. I looked at the man I had vowed to love and cherish, and I felt nothing. The heartbreak I expected did not come. Instead, there was only a clinical detachment. I was no longer a wife discovering betrayal. I was a CEO discovering a liability. We are done talking about feelings, I announced, standing up straighter and smoothing the lapels of my blazer. I am terminating our partnership effective immediately. Consider this a liquidation meeting. I turned my back on Julian, leaving him trembling in his own sweat, and pivoted toward the real threat in the room. Preston Sterling sat there, feigning disinterest, but I noticed his knuckles were white as he gripped his glass. He thought he was untouchable, the puppet master pulling the strings of my idiot husband. He was about to find out that I had cut the strings. You are awfully quiet for a man whose net worth just dropped by 40%. Preston, I said, my voice cutting through the humid tension of the room. Preston scoffed, swirling his scotch. Don't be dramatic. Serafina. Julian's little gambling problem is a nuisance, not a financial crisis for Sterling Capital. We will cover his debts, and life will go on. I am not talking about Julian's poker debts, I replied, walking over to the window and looking out at the rain-soaked city. I am talking about the acquisition, or rather, the failed acquisition. Preston froze. What are you talking about? I turned back to face him, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. That meeting in Chicago, I didn't just listen to Silas play recordings. I convened an emergency board meeting via proxy. As the acting chairwoman representing the Vance Family Trust, I activated the poison pill clause in our company charter at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. The glass in Preston's hand tilted dangerously, amber liquid sloshing over the rim and staining his expensive cuff. The poison pill, he stammered, his composure fracturing. The moment Sterling Capital's stake crossed the 15% threshold, which you did secretly yesterday, the clause triggered. I explained with lethal precision. We flooded the market with new shares, available to every shareholder except the hostile acquirer. Your 15% stake has been diluted down to less than 2%. You didn't buy a company. Preston, you just donated $300 million to the Vance Global Treasury. Preston stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and old. His 2-year plan to strip my father's company for parts had just evaporated in a single second. You couldn't have, Preston whispered, his voice hoarse. That requires a supermajority vote, which I have, I shot back. But that is only the beginning. While I was at it, I decided to be a good citizen. I forwarded a very interesting folder of emails and transaction logs to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Preston stood up so fast his chair toppled backward with a loud crash. You are bluffing. You wouldn't dare involving the feds? I sent the package 20 minutes ago, I said, checking my watch. They are particularly interested in the insider trading ring you have been running through Julian. You are lying, Preston shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. You are just a desperate little girl playing dress-up in her daddy's office. No one will believe Buzz. Preston's phone, sitting on the coffee table, began to vibrate violently. The screen lit up with the name Legal Emergency. He looked at the phone as if it were a bomb. He picked it up slowly, his hand trembling. Sterling speaking. He barked into the receiver. I watched as the blood left his face completely. He listened for 10 seconds, his eyes widening in horror. "What do you mean the trading floor is frozen?" Preston whispered into the phone. "What do you mean there are agents in the lobby? Stall them, do not let them into the server room." He slammed the phone down, breathing heavily, looking like a trapped animal. Julian, sensing the shift in power, scrambled up from the sofa and grabbed Preston's arm. "Boss." "Preston, listen, we can fix this. I can call my contacts." "We can get your hands off me," Preston roared, shoving Julian away with such force that my husband stumbled back against the wet bar. "You incompetence is contagious." "But we are partners," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. "We are in this together." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, Julian, you haven't read the executive summary of my report to the SEC? I didn't implicate Sterling Capital as an institution. I painted a very clear picture of a rogue employee acting alone to mislead his superiors. According to the narrative I provided, Preston is a victim of your deception, just like me." I looked at Preston, seeing the gears turning in his head. He realized he had an out, a slim, dangerous out, but an out nonetheless. To save himself, he had to burn Julian to the ground. "Two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead," I said softly. "Or in this case, if one of them takes the fall." Preston straightened his jacket, his eyes turning cold as he looked at the man he had called a friend 5 minutes ago. The alliance was shattered. The feeding frenzy had begun. Preston Sterling did not hesitate. He did not blink. The moment the survival of his own skin was on the line, the brotherhood of the Scotch glass evaporated instantly. He straightened his tie, the motion sharp and final, and looked at Julian with the clinical detachment of a surgeon cutting out a gangrenous limb. "Julian, you are fired," Preston announced, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Effective immediately." Julian stared at him, his mouth agape, looking like a child who had just been slapped by a parent. "What, Preston? You can't be serious. We are a team." "We are not a team," Preston sneered, stepping away from Julian as if failure were contagious. "You are a rogue employee who has been conducting unauthorized trades and falsifying reports without the knowledge or consent of Sterling Capital. I will be releasing a press statement to that effect within the hour. The firm had no idea. We are victims of your deception. Just like Mrs. Vance here. It was a masterclass in corporate survival. In 3 sentences, Preston had rewritten history, casting Julian as the villain and himself as the oblivious supervisor. Julian crumbled. The arrogant smirk that had defined him for our entire marriage dissolved into a mask of pure terror. He reached out to grab Preston's sleeve, his fingers trembling. "Preston, please, you can't do this to me," Julian begged, his voice cracking. "I did everything you asked. The insider tips, the route schedules. That was your idea. You said I would be a partner. I said nothing of the sort." Preston lied smoothly, brushing Julian's hand off his jacket like it was a piece of lint. "And if you repeat those slanderous lies to the authorities, I will sue you for defamation until your grandchildren are born in debt." I stood by the fireplace, swirling my wine, watching the scene unfold with a cold sense of satisfaction. It was like watching a bad play where the actors had forgotten their lines and started attacking each other. "By the way—" "Preston," I interjected, my voice light and conversational. "Since he is no longer an employee, I assume the company perks are revoked. The black 911 Turbo downstairs, the corporate apartment in Miami." Preston's eyes lit up. He turned back to Julian, his hand extended palm up. "She is right. The car keys. The corporate American Express black card. The building access fob. Hand them over." "Now." Julian looked down at his hands, then up at Preston, then over to me. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving. Slowly, painfully. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys and the wallet. He dropped them into Preston's hand, shrinking with every item he surrendered. He was not just losing things, he was losing his identity. Without the car, the card, and the job, Julian Thorne was nobody. Preston pocketed the items and turned to leave, but Julian was not done. Desperation had made him frantic. He spun around to face me, his eyes wide and wet with tears. He dropped to his knees on the Persian rug, crawling toward me. "Serafina, baby. Please," he whimpered, reaching for the hem of my pants. "Don't let him do this. You have the power to stop it. I did it for us. Don't you see? I wanted to give us the world. I wanted to be the man you deserved. It was the oldest line in the book. The toxic cry of a man who destroys everything and claims it was an act of love." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but disgust. "For us," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Is that why you have a mistress in Soho? Is that why you stole from my father?" "I made mistakes," Julian cried, clutching at the air as I stepped back. "But I love you. We can start over. Just tell your father to call off the lawyers. Please, Serafina. I am your husband." I looked at the gold watch glinting on his wrist. "That Rolex Daytona," I said, pointing at it. "I bought that for your 30th birthday. It cost $40,000. Take it off." Julian froze. "What?" "Take it off," I commanded, my voice hard. "It was a gift for my husband. You are just a stranger trespassing in my home." He hesitated, clutching his wrist protectively. "And the suit." I continued, my gaze sweeping over him. "Custom Armani. Paid for by the joint account, which is funded entirely by my trust distribution. The shoes? Salvatore Ferragamo. Paid for with the bonus you claimed you got, which was actually a withdrawal from our emergency fund. You are stripping me bare," Julian hissed, his sorrow morphing into a sudden ugly rage. The humiliation was too much for his fragile ego to handle. "I am just repossessing my assets," I replied calmly. "You bitch," Julian screamed. His face twisted into a snarl, and he lunged at me. He raised a hand, intending to strike, to assert dominance the only way he had left through violence. He never reached me. Two massive figures materialized from the shadows near the private elevator. They moved with the silent efficiency of predators. One of them, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, caught Julian's wrist in midair. It was Silas Graves's personal security detail. I had not come alone. The bodyguard twisted Julian's arm behind his back with a sickening pop, forcing him face first into the expensive silk cushions of the sofa. "Ah, my arm!" Julian shrieked, writhing in pain. "I wouldn't move if I were you, Mr. Thorne," the bodyguard rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. Julian stopped struggling instantly. He lay there, pinned against the upholstery, panting, defeated. He looked up at me, and I saw the fear in his eyes. The bravado was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was a small, frightened man who realized he had just tried to strike the woman who owned the ground he was lying on. "Pathetic," I whispered, turning away to pour myself another glass of water. "Absolutely pathetic." The elevator doors slid open with a soft, ominous chime, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the room. Silas Graves stepped out. He did not look like a lawyer. He looked like an undertaker who enjoyed his work. Dressed in an immaculate black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him, he carried a thick legal folio under his arm. He walked past the security guards, who were still pinning Julian to the sofa, and placed the documents on the table with a terrifying gentleness. "Mr. Thorne," Silas said, his voice dry as parchment, "I suggest you stop struggling. It is undignified, and quite frankly, You are going to need all your energy for what comes next." Julian went limp, his eyes widening as he recognized the man. Everyone in Seattle knew Silas Graves. If he was in your living room, your life as you knew it was over. "Silas," Julian gasped, rubbing his sore wrist as the guard released him. "This is a misunderstanding. Serafina is overreacting." "I rarely find that to be the case," Silas replied, ignoring Julian's plea and opening the folio. "These are the divorce papers, filed electronically with the King County Superior Court 10 minutes ago. And this is a temporary restraining order, effective immediately, barring you from coming within 500 feet of Miss Vance, her residence, or any Vance Global property." Julian stared at the papers. "You can't just kick me out. I have rights. This is our marital home. I am entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage." Silas adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked at Julian with pity. Clause 4. Section B of your prenuptial agreement specifically defines financial infidelity and conspiracy to defraud as breach of contract events. By attempting to devalue your wife's family company for personal gain, you have triggered the forfeiture clause. "That won't hold up in court," Julian shouted, though his voice lacked conviction. "It has held up in 3 Supreme Court cases I personally argued," Silas countered smoothly. "Furthermore, since you have contributed $0 to the principal mortgage of this penthouse, and all maintenance fees were paid via the Vance Family Trust, a separate entity protected from marital assets, you own precisely 0% of this property. You are leaving tonight with exactly what you brought into this marriage, which, according to my records, is nothing." "And the joint accounts?" Julian asked, his voice trembling. I have expenses coming up." I stepped forward, crossing my arms. "If by expenses, you mean the $2 million you owe to the Petrov Syndicate in Las Vegas, I am afraid you are out of luck." Julian turned pale. "You know about the Russians?" "We know everything." "Julian," I said coldly, "I called the bank an hour ago. All authorized user cards have been canceled. The joint checking account has been frozen pending a fraud investigation." "You don't have a dime to your name." Julian looked around the room, panic setting in. He realized the walls were closing in. No money, no home, no lawyer, and a debt that could get him killed. He turned to Preston, who was already edging toward the door, checking his phone nervously. "Preston, you have to help me," Julian begged. "I need a loan. Just until I get back on my feet. The company owes me. Preston didn't even stop walking. The company owes you a subpoena. Julian, I have a crisis management team waiting for me. Do not call me. Do not come to the office. If you do, I will have you arrested for trespassing." The door clicked shut behind Preston, leaving Julian alone with the wolves. I walked over to the hallway closet and pulled out a bag. It was not his Louis Vuitton duffel. It was a cheap nylon gym bag I had bought from a discount store earlier that day. I tossed it at his feet. "Your things are packed," I said. "I had the maids clear out your closet while you were drinking scotch. It is just your old clothes, Julian. The polyester shirts and the off-brand jeans you wore when I met you? Anything bought with my money stays here." Julian looked at the sad, lumpy bag. It was the physical manifestation of his new reality. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. "Serafina." "Where am I supposed to go?" he whispered. "I have nowhere." "That sounds like a personal problem," I replied, reaching into my pocket. I pulled out a small wad of cash, $50 in small bills, and threw it on top of the bag. "That is enough for a taxi to a motel. I suggest the one on Aurora Avenue. It is within your budget. Now, get out of my house before I have Silas call the police to enforce that restraining order." Julian looked at the money, then at the bag, and finally at me. He saw no mercy in my eyes. Slowly, he bent down, picked up the cash and the cheap nylon bag, and walked toward the elevator. A broken man leaving paradise for the hell he had built for himself. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing Julian inside and cutting his pathetic figure out of my life forever. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood in the center of the living room, waiting for the crash. I waited for the tears, the hysteria, the crushing weight of heartbreak that movies always promised would follow the end of a marriage. But the tears did not come. Instead, my chest felt lighter, as if a heavy, suffocating stone had finally been removed from my lungs. For the first time in 2 years, I could breathe. I walked to the sliding glass doors and pushed them open, stepping out onto the balcony. The cold, damp air of the Seattle night hit me, stinging my cheeks. It smelled of salt water, pine, and rain. It was freezing, but it felt like oxygen. I gripped the cold metal railing and looked out at the city lights reflecting off the dark waters of the bay. I was alone, but I did not feel lonely. I felt cleansed. My phone buzzed in my pocket, vibrating against my hip. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. "Is he gone?" Marcus Vance asked the moment I answered. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer empty platitudes or ask if I needed a shoulder to cry on. My father knew that tonight was not about sorrow. It was about surgery. We had cut out the cancer, and now it was time to close the wound. "He is gone." "Dad," I replied, my voice steady and clear against the wind. Silas escorted him out. "He has nothing." "Good," my father said, his voice gruff with approval. I reviewed the execution of the poison pill clause. You timed it perfectly. Serafina, you waited until the stock hit the exact trigger point before filing the disclosure. That was ruthless. I am proud of you. I had a good teacher. I said, "I am issuing a memo at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," he continued, shifting seamlessly to business. "I am stepping down as CEO to become chairman. You are being appointed as the executive vice president of operations. You earned the chair tonight, kid. Don't be late." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone, a strange sense of peace settling over me. For so long, I had run from this. I had married Julian because I wanted to escape the weight of the Vance legacy. I wanted to be loved for myself, not my last name. I wanted a normal life with a normal husband who came home at 6 o'clock and complained about traffic. But I realized now that normal was a lie I had told myself. By trying to be small, by trying to be a porcelain doll in a display case, I had made myself a target. The price of my naivety was betrayal. I would never pay that price again. I turned back to look at the living room through the glass. The leather sofa where Julian had begged, the crystal decanter he had touched. The very air in the room felt tainted. Silas was packing up his files, his movements precise and efficient. "Silas," I said, stepping back inside and closing the door against the wind. "List the penthouse. I want it sold." Silas paused, looking up over his glasses. "Tonight, first thing in the morning." I confirmed. "I don't care about the price. Just get rid of it. I need a fresh start. Somewhere with no ghosts." "Consider it done." Silas nodded, making a note in his folio. "One more thing. Serafina. I spoke with Elena's attorney in New York while you were on the balcony. She is terrified, but she is willing to join the lawsuit. She wants to see him pay for what he did to her." A wave of fierce protectiveness washed over me. I thought of the woman on the recording, broken and gaslighted, convinced she was insane by the man who was stealing her life. "Tell her she is not fighting alone anymore," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Tell her to fire her public defender. I am funding her entire legal team. We are going to hire the best prosecutors in the country. She won't have to spend a single penny to see justice done. She will be relieved to hear that," Silas said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. I walked over to the wet bar and picked up my wine glass. It was still half full. I swirled the deep red liquid, watching it catch the light. I wasn't drinking to forget. I was drinking to remember. I wanted to remember this moment, the exact second I stopped being a victim. I raised the glass to my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back at me was not the soft, smiling wife Julian thought he could manipulate. Her posture was rigid, her eyes were cold, and her jaw was set in a line of determination. She looked like a CEO. She looked like a Vance. To freedom, I whispered to the empty room. I drank the wine in one long swallow, the taste sharp and bold, just like the future that was waiting for me. By the time the sun rose over the Space Needle the next morning, the name Sterling Capital was radioactive. The financial world woke up to a bloodbath. My decision to trigger the poison pill and alert the SEC had created a domino effect that shattered the firm's reputation before the markets even opened. The headlines were brutal, screaming about fraud, insider trading, and corporate espionage. I watched the coverage on the flat screen in my father's office, sipping black coffee. The image on the screen was grainy, shot from a helicopter, but unmistakable. It showed Preston Sterling being led out of his penthouse in handcuffs, looking disheveled and furious. The caption read, "Billion-dollar bust," but as damaging as it was for Preston, the media had found a more sensational villain to feast upon. Julian. Because Preston had fired him publicly and blamed him for everything the night before. Julian was painted as the mastermind, the rogue agent who had betrayed his wife's family. The photo circulating on Twitter was not the polished headshot from his LinkedIn profile. It was a picture taken by a paparazzi outside our building last night, capturing the exact moment he was shoved into a police cruiser after violating the restraining order by trying to re-enter the lobby. His eyes were wide with terror, his hair messily plastered to his forehead, looking every bit the desperate criminal. "He looks like a frightened rat," my father commented, standing beside me. "The vultures are going to pick him clean." He was right. By noon, reports surfaced that Julian had been bailed out. Not by a high-powered legal team, but by his parents, who had flown in from Ohio and put a lien on their modest retirement home to cover the $50,000 bond. But freedom was a relative term. As soon as Julian stepped out of the precinct, he was not met by friends or supporters. He was met by chaos. A live stream showed Julian trying to shield his face as a group of large, angry men shouted at him from the sidewalk. They were not reporters. They were debt collectors from the private lenders he had borrowed from, the ones connected to the Vegas syndicates. They wanted their $2 million, and they were letting the world know it. Mr. Thorne. "You have 24 hours, one of them shouted on camera. While Julian was being hunted, I was preparing to be crowned. I arrived at the Vance Global headquarters at 10 o'clock sharp. I chose my outfit with the precision of a general going to war, a tailored white suit that stood out starkly against the sea of gray and black suits in the lobby. It was a statement of innocence and power. As I walked through the glass doors, the atmosphere was electric. The whispers stopped. The pitying glances I used to receive from the senior staff were gone, replaced by looks of awe and fear. I wasn't just Marcus Vance's daughter anymore. I was the woman who had taken down a hedge fund in a single afternoon. I stepped onto the podium in the media room, facing a barrage of camera flashes. I didn't flinch. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice projecting clearly without a tremor. "Vance Global Logistics has always been built on integrity. Yesterday, we identified a security breach involving external actors attempting to manipulate our stock. We took immediate, decisive action to protect our shareholders and our legacy. The individuals responsible are now facing justice." A reporter from the Financial Times shouted a question. "Mrs. Vance, your husband is named as a primary suspect. Do you have a comment on his involvement?" I looked directly into the lens. "I have no husband. I have a former business associate who is currently under federal investigation. My focus is entirely on the future of this company and ensuring our shipping lanes remain the most efficient in the world." The headline wrote itself, "The Iron Heiress." Back in the safety of my new office, My phone screened a relentless stream of notifications. Julian was trying to reach me. There were dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and emails. I had my assistant print the emails before forwarding them to the police as evidence of harassment. One email's subject line read, "Please, Serafina, I am sorry." The next one, sent 3 minutes later, read, "You ruined my life, you witch, I will kill you." "He is spiraling," Silas observed, tossing the printouts into a file. "He has no money, no allies, and he is realizing that the world he desperately wanted to belong to has completely rejected him." It was true. The social exile was swift and brutal. I scrolled through Instagram and saw that the same people who had toasted Julian at our wedding were now posting frantic disclaimers. They were deleting photos with him, untagging him, and releasing statements claiming they barely knew him. He had become a social leprosy. The final blow came late that evening. A video surfaced on TikTok, filmed by a patron at a cheap dive bar near the airport where Julian was staying. In the shaky footage, Julian was clearly intoxicated, slumped over a sticky table, wearing a wrinkled shirt. She thinks she is so smart, Julian slurred in the video, slamming his fist on the table. "I made her! She was nothing without me. I should have taken everything." He tried to stand up and knocked over his beer, slipping on the wet floor and crashing down amidst the broken glass. The patrons laughed. The internet laughed harder. The video had 3 million views in 2 hours. I watched it once, impassively. The man who had gaslighted me, who had made me feel small and stupid for years, was now the punchline of a national joke. The image of the successful businessman he had crafted so carefully was gone, replaced by a drunk, weeping loser on a dirty bar floor. I turned off the screen and went back to work. I had a shipping empire to run. It was exactly 6 months later when I walked into the federal courthouse, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. The air inside was sterile and cold, smelling of floor wax and old decisions. I sat in the witness box, smoothing the skirt of my navy blue dress, and looked across the aisle at the man I had once vowed to spend my life with. Julian looked like a ghost of his former self. The charm and the glow of the Hamptons tan were gone, replaced by a sallow gray complexion. He had lost at least 20 pounds. His suit, a cheap off-the-rack polyester blend that was clearly 2 sizes too big, hung off his gaunt frame like a costume on a scarecrow. He stared at me with hollow, bloodshot eyes that held a terrifying mixture of hatred and despair. I gave my testimony with surgical precision. I did not falter. I did not cry. I recounted the dates, the amounts, and the conversations with a clarity that seemed to suck the air out of the defense's case. Every time Julian's lawyer tried to discredit me or paint me as a vindictive ex-wife, I countered with hard evidence bank statements, audio recordings, and the damning emails he had sent me. When the prosecution rested, Julian snapped. The pressure of the last 6 months, combined with the realization that his life was effectively over, caused him to break. He stood up so abruptly that his chair screeched against the floor. "She is lying," Julian screamed, his voice cracking. "She planned this whole thing. She is the one who set me up." He tried to lunge toward the witness stand, his hands clawing at the air as if he wanted to strangle the truth out of me. But he never made it past the bar. 2 bailiffs tackled him instantly, forcing him back into his seat. He struggled against them, panting heavily, his face twisted into an ugly snarl. "You are cold-blooded. Serafina," he shouted, spitting the words at me. "You watched me drown and you didn't do a thing. You are a monster." The courtroom fell silent. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, but I did not look away. I looked straight into Julian's eyes, seeing the man who had mocked my intelligence and stolen my self-worth. "I am not cold-blooded." "Julian," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room without a microphone. "I am just practical. You taught me that." The verdict was swift. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Julian was found guilty on 12 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The judge, clearly unimpressed by Julian's lack of remorse, sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. Preston Sterling, identified as the ringleader, received 15 years. As the bailiffs hauled Julian away, he didn't scream anymore. He just slumped in their grip, a broken man being discarded by society. I didn't watch him go through the side door. I stood up, gathered my purse, and walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking a rhythm of victory on the marble floor. I stepped out of the courthouse and into the rare, blinding sunshine of a Seattle afternoon. It was the kind of light that made everything look sharp and new. My father, Marcus, was leaning against the side of his black sedan, waiting for me. He didn't offer a hug. He offered something better. He opened the car door for me. "It is done," I said as I slid into the leather seat. "It is done," he agreed, closing the door and shutting out the noise of the city. As the car pulled away, I saw a transport bus idling near the loading dock of the courthouse. I knew Julian was inside, shackled and heading to a processing center before being shipped to a penitentiary. I did not turn my head. I kept my eyes forward, watching the skyline of the city that was now my playground. "The harbor expansion plans hit my desk this morning," my father said, opening a folder on his lap. "The board is hesitant about the upfront capital. They think it is too risky." "It is not risky if we secure the Asian trade contracts first," I replied instantly, my mind already shifting gears from the courtroom to the boardroom. "I have a meeting with the delegation from Singapore next week. Once we have their signature, the board will fall in line." My father smiled, handing me a heavy fountain pen. It was the same pen he had used to sign the incorporation papers of Vance Global 40 years ago. "Then you better sign the executive order," he said. I took the pen. The weight of it felt good in my hand. It felt like a weapon and a tool all at once. I signed my name on the document, the ink flowing dark and permanent. Serafina Vance, Executive Vice President. I looked at my signature. The loops were sharper than they used to be. The curves were less hesitant. The girl who had wanted to be a porcelain doll was gone, shattered into a million pieces. But the woman who had put herself back together was stronger than porcelain. My heart had healed, but it was no longer soft. It was armored, beaten into shape by betrayal and cooled in the waters of revenge. I was the Iron Lady now, and I had a company to run. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories. Like this video and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.